Carl Edwards has revealed the reason why he left NASCAR at the end of 2016, and Casey Mears will make his return to NASCAR at Martinsville. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We got some NASCAR and other motorsports stories discussed here today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just show them straight really quickly. We're first going to take a look at a ton of paint schemes that have been revealed over the course of the last couple days. Let's go ahead and just show them straight into them. The first paint scheme we're taking a look at is Chris Buescher's 2025 Dasani scheme that we'll see this weekend at Las Vegas Motor Speedway. Scheme looks pretty cool in my opinion. I like the water look to it. It looks really solid, nice Kroger touch to it. Looking forward to on the racetrack this weekend at Las Vegas Motor Speedway. Next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Blaine Perkins' 2025 City Light scheme that we'll see tomorrow in the Xfinity Series race at Las Vegas. I really like this scheme. The colors look really good on it. I think Jory Anderson Racing's has some good looking ones. This is no exception. Looking forward to see it on the racetrack. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Tyler Reddick's 2025 Jumpman scheme that we'll see at Homestead Miami Speedway. I really like this Jumpman scheme. I've always been a big fan of the Jumpman schemes with Michael Jordan. This one's no exception. It looks really awesome. Looking forward to seeing on the racetrack at Homestead. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Tony Breidinger's 2025 Celsius scheme that we'll see in 3 Truck Series races in 2025. This kind of looks very similar to the Corey LaJoie paint schemes that he's had with Celsius branding, same with AJ Allmendinger. So there's really not much for me to say, but it's pretty cool that Celsius will be working with Tony Breidinger this year. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Kyle Busch's 2025 BetMGM scheme that we'll see this weekend at Las Vegas Motor Speedway. It looks very similar to the scheme he had last year in 2024, also in 2023, but he didn't really have to change much on it. It's good this scheme is back, though, this year. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Ryan Blaney's 2025 Pennzoil scheme that we'll see this weekend at Las Vegas Motor Speedway. Very similar to the 2024 scheme. They've got the white stripe. They've got the yellow. I think the colors were pretty well in this one. Looking forward to seeing on the racetrack later this weekend. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Daniel Dye's 2025 Trackside scheme that we'll see this weekend at Las Vegas Motor Speedway. Scheme's alright. I do like the sponsorship that's working with him, though. The scheme does look solid overall. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Austin Green's 2025 Overplay scheme that we'll see in around 3 or 4 races in 2025. Overplay is also going to sponsor Todd Gillen and a couple other drivers in the lower series this year. The scheme's okay. We'll see how Austin Green can do in this paint scheme. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Cody Ware's 2025 Evel Knievel scheme that we'll see this weekend at Las Vegas Motor Speedway. This is probably my favorite Rick Ware racing scheme we've seen so far in 2025. I think it's really nice touch and pretty cool that Evel Knievel will be sponsoring Rick Ware Racing this weekend. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Josh Valicki's 2025 Raphael Construction scheme that we'll see this weekend at Las Vegas. Scheme's okay in my opinion. It's really cool to see that Raphael Construction, a company that's based out of Las Vegas that was born in 1991. It's cool they're working with the team. This scheme does look solid. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Bubba Wallace's 2025 Columbia scheme that we'll see at Homestead Miami Speedway. I really like this. This is one of my favorite Columbia schemes we've seen Bubba Wallace has since Columbia started joining the team a couple years ago. I love the colors. It's got that Miami vibe look. Looking forward to seeing on the racetrack at Homestead Miami. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Chase Briscoe's 2025 Bass Pro Fishing Classic Spring scheme that we'll see this weekend at Las Vegas Motor Speedway. It's got a new look to it. I do like the different touch to the Bass Pro Shops car. I think it's got a really nice look and fishing scheme that we'll see on the track. And the final paint scheme we're taking a look at is Frankie Muniz's 2025 Morgan & Morgan scheme that we'll see this weekend at Las Vegas Motor Speedway. Looks very similar to the Kyle Busch scheme and the one that Chris Hacker had a couple years ago. I think it does look really solid. Of course, we'll see it tomorrow night in the Truck Series race or later tonight in the Truck Series race. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Las Vegas purse money. So every time you have a NASCAR Cup, Xfinity, and Truck Series race, Bob Pockets puts out the purse money for the event. According to Bob, for the Cup race, it's $11,055,250. For the Xfinity race, it's $1,651,939. And for the Truck race, it's $782,900. Cup Series up a little more because of the new charter agreement that came in. For the Xfinity Series, I think it's a little more than last year, I'm pretty sure, up about 10 or 15% from last year's numbers. And the Truck Series has really not increased too much, which is a shame because the Truck Series, they're not really doing that great in regards to people coming in. They're having issues getting entries. I think a big reason for that is because the purse is not too high for the lower series currently at the moment. But overall, at least the Cup and Xfinity purses do look really good for this weekend. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about pre-race concerts. As there was a report by Bob Pockrass yesterday that Bob Pockrass has revealed some pre-race concerts that have been revealed for some upcoming races later this year. So at Texas Motor Speedway in late April, Ernest will be performing the pre-race concert. While at Michigan in June, Nate Smith, he'll be performing the pre-race concert. This is part of the Busch Summer Concert Series that is going to be going on throughout the 2025 season. Both are pretty popular in their own name. Both had #1 songs on the country charts and have both had some pretty big hits on the Billboard Hot 100 and are really well streamed on Spotify and other big things as well. I think they're solid people to bring in this year, and I think it's going to be interesting to see two newer people in the industry and in the game working with it. I think it's pretty interesting for sure overall, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Jonathan Wheatley. As it was announced yesterday that Jonathan Wheatley has been officially named the new team principal of Kick Team Sauber and will start taking that role on April 1st. Jonathan Wheatley, for those who don't know, was formerly working at Red Bull for many, many years. It was one of the big reasons for Red Bull's success over the last 5 seasons. He left the team in the middle of 2024 to find a new job for 2025, and now will get the chance and opportunity to work with this team in 2025. I think this is a massive pickup for Sauber. They've really struggled the last year or so. They had a bad year overall in 2024, and I think they really need to get a kick in the butt to try to get better. And I think bringing Jonathan Wheatley in, that is the perfect person to bring on who really can help the program get a lot better over there. So I think it's a massive signing for the team, and I think that Jonathan Wheatley is going to bring a lot to the table, and I think he's going to really help that program get a lot better. I think it's a massive and a really, really huge hiring. Glad to see that Jonathan Wheatley will get the chance and opportunity to go ahead and work with the Sauber organization in 2025. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Earnhardt. As it was finally revealed earlier today that the documentary that Prime has been promising to release in regards to Dale Earnhardt is finally been officially announced earlier today. It'll be a new documentary that is going to be taking place on Prime. It'll be coming out on Memorial Day weekend. This coincides with the arrival of NASCAR on Prime, where of course the Coca-Cola 600 is going to take place during that time, and that is going to be the first broadcast for a NASCAR race on the Amazon brand. And I think that this documentary, from what I saw from the trailer today, I gotta say it does look really, really good. Everything I'm seeing from it shows a lot of promise. I know we've seen a lot of these Dale Earnhardt documentaries in the past, but I think we're gonna get some new information in regards to Dale Earnhardt and some things we've never heard of before. And I think a lot of people that have been involved in the Dale Earnhardt life will get a chance and opportunity to kind of talk about some of the things that they've never been able to share before. So I think that's an exciting part of it for sure. Pretty cool to see that there's a new documentary coming out in regards to Dale Earnhardt later this year. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Grand Prix of Arlington. As it was announced earlier today that the Grand Prix of Arlington will officially take place on March 13th through 15th of 2026. We already knew, of course, they're going to be doing a street race in Dallas. Of course, multiple companies like NTT are behind this race, and the Dallas Cowboys are helping in a pretty big way with this series. And now we officially know the date. This basically will potentially be the first or second race of 2026, as I don't know when the Grand Prix of St. Pete is going to take place. I have to think that that is going to be the first race of the year in the first week of March, and then most likely the Grand Prix of Arlington is going to be the second race of the year. Now, that does, I think, unfortunately come into effect with the 12 hours of Sebring, which could be a major factor. Some of those drivers in IndyCar going to the 12 hours of Sebring, unless, of course, the 12 hours of Sebring gets moved up a little bit, which it doesn't seem like from the schedule that was released today. Actually, it's a week later, But I do think that that could have some issues in some of the other races coming up from IndyCar down the road. Nonetheless, I think it's going to be interesting to see how the race goes, and I do think that what they have for the racetrack itself, it does look pretty good. In my opinion, I think it actually looks like a pretty good racetrack. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Dawson Cram. As it was announced earlier this evening that Dawson Cram will drive the 74 for Mike Harmon Racing for this weekend at Las Vegas Motor Speedway and then next week at Homestead Miami Speedway. In reality, we'll sponsor him for those two races this year. Dawson Cram made his season debut this past weekend at Phoenix, made the field, and was running actually inside the top 25 before he had a tire failure near the end of the event. I think Dawson Cram is a pretty underrated driver. I know we all kind of talked about that he brought that caution out about 5 years ago in the Truck Series Championship race, but I do think Dawson Cram is someone who's been able to do a really solid job with this organization over the course of the last couple of years and has got this team in the field quite a few times recently. We'll see what Dawson Cram can do as he looks to run really, really well this weekend and next weekend. I don't think anybody's going home this weekend, so I think he should be able to make the field and help the Mike Harmon Racing team get a lot of owners points going forward. I think it's a good hiring to bring him in. Looking forward to see what he can do with the team in those two races this year. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Brad Perez. As it was announced earlier this evening that Brad Perez will drive the 45 for Alpha Prime Racing next weekend at Homestead Miami Speedway. This will be the second of 4 scheduled starts currently at the moment that he has with the team this year. He did try to make his season debut at Circuit Americas, but unfortunately failed to qualify because the Alpha Prime Racing team was not up to scratch and not up to par as they've been in the past, which I think that team did show a lot of improvement by running well this past week at Phoenix. Brad is a pretty underrated driver, and I think going out and doing different types of tracks instead of just running road courses and going out and trying mile and a half, I think that's really good for him. I think Brad Perez is someone who's worked his butt off in this industry to get a chance and opportunity. I think that he is someone who could be very, very competitive for sure. So we'll see how he ends up doing this week, next weekend at Homestead. He's got a really nice looking car too for the weekend. I think it's a great opportunity. Looking forward to see what he can do in that car next week in a Homestead as Alpha Prime looks to continue getting better as an organization. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Stefano Domenicali. As it was announced yesterday that Stefano Domenicali has officially been announced as to extend his contract as CEO of Formula One through 2029. Stefano Domenicali, I believe, took over being the CEO and president of the Formula One around 2020 or 2021 and has been there for a very, very long time. Now, obviously, Stefano Domenicali, there's some certain things that a lot of people are not the biggest fans of. He was, of course, against Andretti getting into Formula One for the longest time, but now with Andretti and Michael no longer being involved in it, it seems like that they're a little bit more open to it. And I think that Stefano has said some things that are good for the sport, and I know that he kind of wants to grow Formula One to be this really big thing, but I'm not sure if Stefano is going to really help that long term. Now, that being said, a lot of people in Formula One really like the guy, so I'm not surprised to see him sticking around for 2026 and beyond at least. And I would not be surprised or shocked with him only being 59 years old and turning 60. I would have to think he's going to be the president even past 2029, and he's probably going to be the president up until he's around 70, so probably like 2035 he's going to be around till. So, though, I'm not really sure how he's going to do as a CEO long term. I don't know if he's going to be the one that's going to be behind hurting the sport as a whole, but it's not surprising to see him sign an extension to continue being the CEO of Formula One for the not-so-distant future. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Jamie Chadwick. As it was announced yesterday that Jamie Chadwick was officially announced as a new personnel who will join Sky Sports as a commentator in 2025. She'll be doing stuff with practice, and I think she'll also be on some of the pre-race shows before the cars get going, which I think her first gig may be at Australia, but I'm not entirely sure. Jamie Chadwick, of course, won her first Indy NXT race this past year at Road America, and she's going to be getting full-time, I believe, in the European Le Mans Series this year. Jamie Chadwick had tried to go to IndyCar full-time this year with, I believe, Juncos Hollinger Racing, but that deal never ended up going through, and unfortunately, because of that, she was not able to get a gig in IndyCar this season. As for Jamie Chadwick getting a chance to work with Sky, this is one that makes sense. She, of course, won multiple W Series championships and also competed in multiple Formula One type of series over the course of the last couple seasons. And I think that she is someone who could bring a lot to the table, especially if having prior experience in this series. So I think working with the Sky Sports team is a really huge deal. Glad to see that she's going to be joining it. I wish she was full-time at IndyCar this year, but I'm also glad to see that she'll get the chance to work with that. She'll be on your Formula One broadcast, and being part of that team is really, really huge. Glad to see she'll at least have a gig with Sky Sports in 2025. I think that she's going to be able to bring a lot to the table with Sky Sports this year, along with Jensen Button, David Croft, Lynn Karun Chandok's back, Bernie Collins is back this year, Danica's back this year, and many other people are back this year. I think she's a really good hiring, though, for the series. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Brent Crews. Now, it was shockingly announced and reported by Bob Pockrass yesterday that Brent Crews was handed a $1,000 fine yesterday. Now, why was Brent Crews handed a $1,000 fine? Well, apparently, he was not wearing his head socket that you're required to wear at every single race, not just in NASCAR ranks, but also in ARCA as well. And because of that, he got a $1,000 fine. Now, obviously, ARCA's not going to take the win away from him for not wearing a head socket. Now, I think this all comes from what happened last week. There was a rain delay that took place right before the green flag dropped, and they basically gave the teams, from what Brayton Lasser had said, like 3 or 4 minutes to get everybody out to the track, and it seemed like it was just a mistake by him and people in his team to not get him prepared and ready to go. I know I saw some people that were not happy with this, but one, Joe Gibbs Racing is probably going to pay the fine. $1,000 really isn't that much, all things considered, considering what he did. I mean, $1,000 really isn't that big of a penalty, right? But I think that it's kind of crazy that, because we usually don't see penalties for head sockets, but head sockets have been required in helmets for a very, very long time in motorsports. So when I saw this, I was just really shocked that a team had not been prepared for this kind of situation like this, because I feel like this is something they should have been prepared for. But sometimes when you get into situations like this, you do forget and you make some mistakes. It is what it is at this point. It's disappointing how it ended up happening, but at the same token, same time, at least we know what happened, and at least their fine will probably be paid. I don't see this being an issue going forward. I think a team will be more prepared in these situations down the road, and I think it's good that a penalty is handed, because you got to have the head socket. It's safety reasons, and you got to make sure everything is safe, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Toby Sowery. As it was announced earlier today that Toby Sowery will officially become the reserve and development driver at RL Racing in 2025. He also will be working, I believe, still with Dale Coyne Racing also later this year as well. Now, Toby Sowery last year made starts with Dale Coyne Racing and really impressed in the select race he had in 2024. And that's one of the reasons why he's getting this chance and opportunity to work with RLL Racing in 2025. I think Toby Sowery deserved to be this year full-time in IndyCar. There have been some talks about him maybe going to Dale Coyne Racing full-time, but Rinus VeeKay ended up taking a C, which, no offense, Toby Sowery, but Rinus VeeKay is a better driver. Now, that being said, I think this is a really good gig for Toby Sowery. I think he's going to be working with a team that, while they're not the fastest organization in the world, they're going to be able to bring Toby in there to really develop their organization. And I think long-term down the road, he's going to be probably in a similar position to Yuri Vips, which, as speaking of Yuri Vips, he's still apparently at the team and organization, so he's not going anywhere currently at the moment. There were some questions whether he was going to be gone from the team, but at least as of now, Toby Sowery will kind of be in the same position Yuri Vips is in. I'm glad to see that he does have a deal with the team for this year, and will get to work with the RL Racing organization and team in the 2025 season in IndyCar. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about High Limit Racing. As it was announced earlier this evening that High Limit Racing has officially announced a new franchise system that is going to be taking place starting in 2026. This course is going to be that new charter system that is going to be coming in for the High Limit Racing Series, but because of NASCAR's lawsuit going on currently at the moment, they're no longer calling it charters because of that lawsuit between 2011 and Farm Motorsports and the countersuit going on. They're going to be calling it a franchise system. It is going to start off with 10 franchises throughout 2026, and they are going to be permanent charters that you can buy, I believe, for around 1.1 or like a couple $100,000, I'm pretty sure. And the value of those charters will go up throughout time, and as time progresses and goes on, more charters are going to end up being available for the teams to use. I'm not a big fan of charters and guaranteed spots, which, by the way, one thing that was brought up is the fact that there are no guaranteed spots, so no one will be locked in. So that's actually a big thumbs up to me, is the fact that no one is going to be guaranteed into races. So let's say like Kyle Larson or like a Brad Sweet or someone who competes in the series, which, by the way, I do expect those guys to make every race, and same with Corey Day as well. But I think those having like franchises come into play for more money and potentially more leverage down the road, I think that's actually huge. Now, not calling it charters and basically being able to sell it off and selling off assets is really not the end of the world overall. And I think there's some positives definitely to these franchises coming in 2026. Though I do think there are some negatives too into this kind of stuff coming into play. But at the same time, I think it's definitely interesting that they're bringing this stuff in nonetheless. And I think because we've known this has been coming for a couple years now, but I think it's certainly interesting. I know there's some controversy around it as well, but I do think there's some good positive stuff when it comes to this kind of stuff with the High Limit Series having a charter-like system in 2026. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Joseph Newgarden. Now, there's some interesting quotes that came out earlier this week in regards to Joseph Newgarden. Adam Stern had reported on a couple of these stories. He talked about the potential of IndyCar growing to maybe be the future of the sport and maybe becoming the top motorsports once again, as Adam Stern had reported that Joseph Newgarden thinks IndyCar can become the top motorsport in the U.S. again. He wants to see IndyCar where it was about 30 years ago when it was at the top ranks, and he believes with the Fox partnership that it can definitely happen again. I do appreciate Joseph Newgarden's optimism. I think there's definitely a lot of optimism with IndyCar currently at the moment in some areas. I think especially with TV provider and how insightful they are, and we've seen the ratings so far for the first race of the year. But we need to pump the brakes in regards to IndyCar going back to the top. Even though NASCAR has been declining in ratings, NASCAR is still king in the United States. And while IndyCar did gain some on NASCAR even on cable still drew nearly 3 million viewers. The IndyCar race to St. Pete, while it drew 1.5 million, that is about half what NASCAR drew on cable. IndyCar's got a long way to go if they ever think they're going to get up to NASCAR. They've not been the top king since the split happened, and they've still been trying to recover from that split that happened a while back. So while I do appreciate the optimism from Joseph Newgarden, I think it's good to have some optimism. You want to see your series succeed and become the top level series once again. I do genuinely believe that maybe it's a little bit optimistic thinking from Joseph Newgarden at this point. You need to have ovals on your tracks, number one. That's the most important thing, is I think if they want to have the chance to get to that level once again, ovals have to be added. I think that's one big thing that fans like. Ratings generally are good for those types of tracks, so they can add some ovals to the IndyCar schedule. I think that would help, but I do think it's some wishful and optimistic thinking from Joseph Newgarden, which, again, I appreciate trying to be a little optimistic about IndyCar, but I think they need to kind of look at some of the issues, especially since we don't even know when the new car is going to be coming in, because it may not be coming until 2028 or even 2029 at this point. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about IMSA. As it was announced earlier today that the 2026 IMSA schedule has been officially finalized and revealed. And it's pretty much the same schedule from 2025 besides a couple things. So season's going to kick off on January 24th through 25th with the Rolex 24. After that, the Sebring 12 Hours will take place on March 21st. Then we'll go to Long Beach on April 18th during the IndyCar weekend. Then they'll head to Laguna Seca on May the 3rd. After that, they'll go to Detroit on May 30th, and then to Mid-Ohio on June 7th. After that, we'll go to Watkins Glen on June 28th for the 6-hour Salem race. Then we'll have Canadian Tire on July 12th, and then Road America, which has been added to the 6-hour endurance races for next year on August 2nd. Then they'll go to Virginia International Speedway on August 23rd. Then Indianapolis has been shortened from a 6-hour race to a sprint race on September 20th. And then they'll go to Road America Atlanta for the final race with Petit Le Mans on October 3rd. In general, I do think there's some positives here. I think it's good the Rolex 24 is going to be right around the end of the January like it's been the last couple of years. I think it's good Road America is getting their races extended because I think 2 hours, 45 minutes is way too short. That getting 6 hours, but I think the Indianapolis should also still be an endurance race. But again, it's a very similar schedule to 2024 and 2025 as well. There weren't many changes. That's why the schedule gets out early. It's one big positive with the Sebring 12 Hours is generally you do get the schedule out a lot earlier. Maybe there's a negatives because you can't go out and get new tracks, which I think Dakota down the road could get added to the IMSA schedule this upcoming years. But I do think the IMSA schedule, all things considered, is actually a really solid one in my opinion. And I think it's good that the IMSA schedule was finally unveiled earlier today. And I think that the IMSA schedule for 2024 is solid. Like I said, Rolex 24 opening up and Road Atlanta Petit Le Mans ending the year. I think that's the way it should be. In my honest opinion, I think the schedule is pretty good for IMSA in 2025. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Corey Heim. As it was announced yesterday that Corey Heim will drive the number 24 car for Sam Hunt Racing next weekend at Homestead Miami Speedway. This will be a second of his many scheduled Xfinity Series starts with the program in 2025. I believe 2311 Racing, while they didn't really help much at COTA, I believe that 2311 Racing will also be helping sponsor this car this upcoming weekend as well. Corey Heim ran very, very well Circuit Americas in the car a couple weeks ago, but unfortunately got took out by the eventual winner of the race, Connor Zilic. He had a fast car in the event, was running in the top 5, and got taken out by the guy who ended up winning the race. I think Corey Heim will be a major factor to win. I think the Sam Hunt Racing cars, especially with Corey Heim, are going to be quick. Dean Thompson, not so much, unfortunately. I really don't expect much from Dean Thompson in that car, but I do think that Corey Heim will be a solid factor, and I think a pretty big contender to win with that car. But we all got to remember Kyle Larson's going to be in that field, and I think there's a lot of other really big contenders from the Cup side that are going to be in that field. I think Ross Chastain's also racing next weekend at Homestead, I'm pretty sure. So I think there's some other Cup guys going to run, but I think the big worry is going to be Kyle Larson in that race. But I think Corey Heim's a really solid driver, and I think he's going to do a fantastic job in that car. Excited to see what he can do with the team at Homestead. It's a good track for him. Historically been good there in the NASCAR Xfinity Series, and I think he'll have a really great chance and a fantastic opportunity to be very competitive in that car, and I think it's good to see him back in that car later this year and next week at Homestead Miami Speedway. Looking forward to see how he performs. I really think he will be a pretty big factor to contend for a great run at Homestead Miami Speedway. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Denny Hamlin. As it was announced yesterday that Denny Hamlin has officially landed a new sponsor for 2025. The new sponsor is going to be called AMPM. They're going to sponsor Denny Hamlin for 2 races this year. They'll be on the West Coast, first at Sonoma in the middle of July on July 12th, and then later this year in October at Las Vegas Motor Speedway. This is only the second new sponsor Denny Hamlin has picked up for the 2025 season. I believe he picked up another big company for the Daytona 500. And a couple other companies I believe are expected to still sponsor Denny Hamlin throughout 2025. Yahoo has worked with him to start the year, and Sports Clips also sponsored Denny Hamlin in select races this year. We haven't seen that big key sponsor work with Denny Hamlin to start off 2025. We all know, of course, that Mavis Tire is no longer sponsoring Denny Hamlin for the program, and FedEx, which had been with Joe Gibbs Racing since all the way back in 2004 going into 2005, they no longer are working with Joe Gibbs Racing as well, and they're no longer involved really in sports currently at the moment. When I think of this AMPM car, which is the gas station chain, which is going to be kind of competing with the Terribles brand, which, funny enough, the family of Riley Herbst, which drives for Denny Hamlin's organization with 2311, they're funny enough, they're competing against this gas station on the West. But I do think that it's good to see Denny Hamlin does have a new sponsor. Now, Sonoma, Denny Hamlin's probably going to struggle. He could be looking to become the first driver to ever have 3 straight last place finishes at a same track. So we'll see if that ends up coming true. But I do think that Denny Hamlin picking up a new sponsor is a really big deal, right? Because we've been having talking points about whether Denny Hamlin is going to have a new sponsor for the year. But it looks like he does have one, which is really exciting to see. And I think that having a new company like AMPM, which is still a pretty big company, all things considered, is good to see. Denny Hamlin does have a new sponsor, AMPM, stepping up and working with him in 2 NASCAR Xfinity Series races in the Cup Series, I should say, races in 2025. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the CW. Now, we have talked a lot about the CW on the channel over the course of the last couple of weeks. We've talked about the positives of the CW, and we've talked about the negatives with the CW. I think we all can say that the CW generally has really, really good broadcasts, and I think they have some of the best broadcasts out there. One of the big reasons is because of NASCAR Productions. NASCAR Productions is behind a lot of the broadcasts for the NASCAR Xfinity Series currently at the moment. However, there are some major glaring issues, and it's the accessibility of the races. Now, I have been able to tune in all the races and have not had these issues. But there's a lot of parts of the country, like up in Michigan, Wisconsin, and even areas like Georgia and even Portland as well, having major trouble and issues being able to view the races. And Matt Weaver from SportsDot and I believe some of the other big companies in the motorsports world, he reached out to some of the people at the CW, and they revealed some very interesting information to him. They do say that they are aware of some of the situations going on and some of the big issues, and they're working on those issues currently at the moment. And Matt Weaver followed up another tweet responding to this by saying that in the Detroit area, they are looking to stream the races on the app. And I got to say to that is a major, major thumbs up for me. Now, in regards to the CW issues, I've been saying this for the longest time and over the last couple weeks. The easiest thing that could resolve some of these issues and problems, because the CW isn't like Fox or NBC or ABC or USA or whatever big networks there are, they all are kind of like conglomerated together. The big issue to CW, it's all affiliates across the U.S., and that's the problem. You need everybody to be aligned together if they want to be a true sports network. Or, if you have issues showing on TV, just put the races on the app. I've been saying this for a while. These races need to be available on the app because that's the easiest way to get fans to tune in. If you're not allowing the race to be on the app, you're allowing practice qualifying to be on the app, and you make everybody go to the app to watch it at CW. So why not just go ahead and make the race available on the app? That's a simple solution, in my opinion, that will resolve a lot of these issues and problems. And I think that's the best thing you can do to resolve some of the issues going on in regards to CW. If they can do that, I think that's the best way to go going forward. And I think that fixed some of the issues. But at least CW is aware of what's going on and are looking to address it. But again, the easiest thing they can do to fix and resolve the issues is putting the races on the app and making them available on the app, in my honest opinion, for people that are not able to watch the races. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about practice. Now, earlier this week on a Dale Jr. Down for the Carl Edwards Dale Jr. Down was released, Dale Jr. always does this podcast reveal, basically talking about some of the stuff that happened from the prior week. And he talked about, I think, the Catherine Lake situation a little bit, but he also talked about the fact that NASCAR needs a little bit more practice going forward and calls for more practice and says we need to have more practice going on every single week like we saw before the NASCAR Cup Series race at Phoenix, which I totally agree with Dale Jr. on this. I think Dale Jr. is absolutely on point. And I know that some of the drivers, and he even mentioned this too, during that podcast episode that kind of came out, he basically kind of said some drivers don't want the extra practice and many drivers don't want it. But if the drivers don't want it, they don't have to participate. It's an optional practice. But teams that need to practice and get their cars up to speed, they should be allowed to adjust on it and get practice time as well. And I think Dale Jr. is right, because one thing with extra practice is you get more storylines that are created. And I think storylines are really, really important for the sport. Also, when you have practice, you get better racing. I think Phoenix is a prime example. I don't think the race is top tier like everyone was saying, but I think the Phoenix race is one of the best Phoenix races we have probably seen in the last couple of years. I think the option tire made it a really, really intriguing and fun race. It was still very difficult to pass, sure, but it was one of the better Phoenix races that we have seen in a very long time. And having the extra practice session to test that option tire out made people more compelled, and it made it more intriguing to me. And I know they've added more time on the group practice sessions you're going to see at Las Vegas tomorrow, but I do think you really, really kind of need to look at adding more practice sessions, having longer practice sessions going forward. And I think Dale Jr., again, nailed it here. And I'm not the only one that's saying this. Brad Gazossi agrees with me on this, and many other people in the industry agree with me on this as well. There needs to be more practice available, and I really hope down the road we can have more practice sessions available for the team so they can get their cars up to snuff and up to par and make it, because I think more practice is better for the sport, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Amazon Prime. As it was reported by Austin Karp from Sports Business Journal and Adam Stern as well, the NASCAR expects to get similar viewership for Prime races as it gets on cable, meaning likely around 2 million viewers. Continuing on, they are expected to have an extended post-race show since there's no TV windows going to be coming into effect with Amazon Prime. Let's first begin with the first part, and that being the viewership. A lot of people are kind of unknown on how many people are actually going to tune in to the Amazon network because, no offense to NASCAR, but NASCAR has one of the oldest fan bases currently at the moment. And I think that's one thing that's why there's pretty big concern around this issue. But If they get around 2 million people to tune into Amazon, that is a really big thumbs up, especially for the first few races. And as more people do buy subscriptions to Amazon, which I believe around 170, 180 million people do have Amazon subscriptions, I got one myself here, I think that more people will tune in. But I think they're looking for that younger demographic too, and that's the ultimate goal, is they're trying to get that younger demographic. While NASCAR has a really old fan base, they want to get that younger demographic, and I think if they're able to get 2 million people at least on those broadcasts, I think that's a massive thumbs up and a great step in the right direction. The other big part, and the thing that excited me, is an extended post-race show. I have been clamoring for this for a very long time. Because one issue I have with Fox, and I've got a lot of issues with Fox, but one big issue I have with Fox, they'll have like a 2-hour pre-race show for like Phoenix, right? And then they'll only stay on the air for like 10 to 15 minutes. For me, there shouldn't be as much pre-race, and I think there needs to be a lot more post-race. I think post-race creates a lot more talking points after the race, and we're not having to have all these streams going on after the race is over to kind of talk about the race. You're going to have more people that are going to be willing to watch those post-race shows, hear people like Carl Edwards a little bit, hear Corey LaJoie a little bit speak about it. I think that's one thing that Amazon's doing. And I think Amazon is doing a lot of things really good currently at the moment right now, and I'm liking a lot of things I'm hearing. Well, I'm not sure how the broadcasts are going to be. I believe NASCAR Productions is going to be behind those broadcasts, which I think is a really, really huge deal. And everything I'm hearing currently with Amazon, their pit reporters, their broadcast team, the people in the pre- and post-race show, a lot of things I'm seeing, I'm really, really liking. And overall, I think it's a lot of positives currently at the moment in regards to Amazon right now. And having a longer post-race show is another major step in the right direction. And will really get Amazon to go to that next level, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kevin Harvick. Now, we have talked a lot about officiating on this channel over the course of the last couple of weeks with issues of calling the races at the end. And Kevin Harvick in this most recent Happy Hour podcast was not really happy with multiple things. Number one was in regards to the Austin Cindric penalty, where he basically says it's BS that Austin Cindric did not get a suspension for right rear and tie dealing down the straightaway at Circuit of the Americas. And he said that he should have been suspended for what happened at COTA there. But one thing he kind of talked a little bit about in regards was about the Chase Briscoe penalty and him getting his penalty changed and no longer having a 100-point penalty and going from being about 36 or 37 in the standings all the way up to being inside the top 16 at the time. Of course, he's fallen outside the top 20 because he had a bad race at Phoenix. But one thing that got really interesting, and shout out to Breakart for putting this clip out on his Twitter page because he's the one that posted it there. He basically revealed on his podcast and reveals why Stewart-Haas Racing did not appeal the Talladega penalty from 2022. Kevin Harvick had been part of the photo finish where Ryan Blaney picked up the win, and Kevin Harvick had finished second. Had Kevin Harvick crossed the finish line first and not been disqualified, he would have won the race in his final season. But because Kevin Harvick got disqualified, he went from finishing in second place in the race and finishing in the back of the field. The reason that Stewart-Haas Racing, according to Kevin Harvick, did not go ahead and appeal the penalty is because Gene Haas and Gunther Steiner have ownership in one of the parts suppliers, that being Fiberworks. So that is certainly interesting. Fiberworks is one of the companies that I believe does manufacturing for the next-gen car and is a next-gen supplier, I believe, on the spoiler of the car, if I'm not mistaken. Had they went ahead and appealed those penalties, it would have been a massive, massive conflict of interest. Obviously, we talk about suppliers. NASCAR does not want these teams messing with the next-gen parts and, of course, the supplying parts that come out. But when you find out that there are certain suppliers that are coming out and they're part of certain teams like Stewart-Haas Racing and Gene Haas, who had a little bit of his hands in the basket of the next-gen car a little bit, I think that's certainly interesting, and I think that's why Stewart-Haas Racing got handed some pretty penalties too, like the Chase Briscoe penalty, where he got, 120-point penalty and got an L3 penalty, I'm pretty sure, at the Coke 600 in 2023, which was the biggest penalty we've seen in next-gen history for one single driver, and I think that's because they were kind of doing those things. Stewart-Haas Racing was trying to do the old-school way, too, of how they kind of worked on their cars, and it kind of backfired on them because you look at the situation for Stewart-Haas, and they kind of struggled a little bit in regards to performance in some big ways. So I think there's certainly some interesting things that are revealed in that podcast that Kevin Harvick kind of talked about. And I think the fiberwork stuff is certainly interesting. We don't know who all is involved. I know McLaren's involved with the next-gen car in some way, shape, or form. And I think some of the teams are involved, like Hendrick Motorsports and Richard Childress are involved with some of the other parts of the car, I'm pretty sure. But it's certainly interesting that Gene Haas is part of it, and how they went ahead and tried to appeal that penalty. There would have been a massive conflict of interest and been something to definitely look at had they tried to go ahead and appeal it, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about the open exemption policy. As it was announced yesterday, the NASCAR has officially updated the rule in regards to the open exemption policy. The new rule states, if open exemption is granted in certain races that they're going to be able to grant it, there will be 41 cars automatically in the field. They will not have the situation where if an car that does apply for the OEP, if they try to head and qualify, there's no longer going to be the situation very similar to the Daytona 500. You're just going to be given the 41st spot. Now, of course, you can qualify up front, but now instead of having to qualify your way in and being only 40 cars in the field, now you're automatically going to be granted that 41st spot. That actually makes a lot of really good sense, in my opinion, that they're going ahead and doing it this way. As much as I think the original OEP rule made a lot of sense, it did create a lot of confusion. It's something that I think Jimmy Johnson brought up when he was being interviewed during Daytona 500 Media Days, is he felt very, very confused about the rule. I think this simplifies it a lot more. Now, this could mean that we may see less people try to go for the open exemption policy, but I think that NASCAR had to do it this way because I don't think they wanted to have a similar situation happen with Elio Castroneves, right? So I think that's the best thing. But the big other change that I've not seen a lot of people talk about is the fact that with the new open exemption policy rule, now they're going to be choosing what races may or may not be allowed for the open exemption policy. I find that to be very certainly interesting, and when I think of races that NASCAR may not go ahead and use the OEP, I would have to think during the end of the season, during the playoffs. Most likely probably all 9 playoff races prior to the championship race, and most likely during the championship race as well. I don't think this rule will come into effect for the ones that would be OEP, like the Brickyard 400, like, of course, the Coke 600, and then even like the Chicago Street Course race, because I do think that Chicago could have more than 40 cars, especially if someone like a Connor Zilisch wants to come and run another Cup race. I would have to think Red Bull's going to try to convince Trackhouse to field another car for Connor Zilisch during that event, and you're going to have probably some other cars that are going to show up at Chicago that we're not even sure, because I know Will Brown's talking about making some starts in NASCAR right now. I think they have to kind of go with these rules in regards to the OEP, and I think updating the rule, I think it makes a lot of sense. The new rules they've gone ahead and implemented. And I think that they had to update it because there was a lot of controversy around the rule. But I've seen when I look at reactions to the updates to the open exemption policy that came out yesterday, I do think that there's a lot of positives to this, and I think a lot more people are happy with it. Now, obviously, now it's just a promoter's provisional at this point. NASCAR was not calling it a promoter's provisional, but in reality and honesty, it is a promoter's provisional. That's what exactly it is, and that's what NASCAR really wanted to kind of call it. And I know they don't want to call it a promoter's provisional, but it's very similar to the stuff that Dale Jr. had when he raced at Florence in 2024 in the number 8 Budweiser car, which we could still see Budweiser get involved in the sport at some point this year, by the way. Nonetheless, I think it's a really good decision to go ahead and update that open exemption policy because, like I already mentioned, there was a lot of confusion on it, and drivers like Martin Truex Jr., Jimmy Johnson were not happy. BJ McLeod was not happy about it with those guys being open cars, and I think Dale Jr. wasn't happy about it either. But I do think updating the open exemption policy is the best way to go, and I think that if, like, let's say Lewis Hamilton or Max Verstappen want to go race at Phoenix in the championship event, they're not going to be allowed to do it, so I think it's the best thing that could have been done in regards to the open exemption policy, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the first of 2 major stories in today's episode as we're talking about Casey Mears. As it was announced earlier today that Casey Mears will make his official return to NASCAR. He'll drive the number 66 car for NBM Motorsports or Garage 66 at Martinsville with Go Hitch Go as the sponsor. This will be the first time that Casey Mears has competed in the NASCAR Cup Series since 2019 when he drove the number 27 car for Premium Motorsports, which had association with Germain Racing and Richard Childress Racing as well. In the last couple of years, Casey Mears has been doing some stuff outside of the racetrack since he retired from racing in NASCAR. Now, the last time Casey Mears raced full-time in NASCAR Cup competition was 2016 when he drove for Germain Racing in the number 13 car. The last time he ran a part-time stint in more than one race was in 2017 when he drove the number 98 car for the Curb Abajan team in the NASCAR Xfinity Series, which is owned by Fred Biaggi, which of course had a little bit of partnership with Stuart Haas Racing, but the number 98 in the races that Casey drove for was not associated with that organization and team. And Mears had some decent success in the 98 car, but wasn't up front competing for wins and did contend for top 10s, but wasn't a major factor in 2017. Since the time that Casey Mears has been racing full-time in NASCAR since he left the sport at the end of 2019, Casey Mears has been interested and has been open to getting back into NASCAR. Back in 2023 with his friendship and partnership with Jimmy Johnson, many people thought if he was going to make starts in NASCAR Cup competition, it was going to be with Legacy Motor Club, considering, like I mentioned, that Jimmy Johnson and Casey Mears do have a really good friendship on and off the racetrack. That would have made the most sense to me. But I was not expecting that MBM or Garage 66 would be the team that Casey Mears would get behind the wheel of. And I think this is a really good opportunity for Casey. Now, obviously, Garage 66, we know they're probably going to be the slowest car in the field. It's going to be very similar when Catherine Lake drove the 78 car. But unlike Catherine Lake, who didn't really have any stock car experience when she was behind the wheel, Casey Mears did have a lot of stock car experience. So even though I think Casey's probably going to be a little bit off the pace, unless, of course, the Yates group, the Doug Yates and the Yates engines can really come in and help that program quite a bit, which I think they're certainly going to try to help a little bit. They did that for Chandler Smith, and Chandler Smith had a chance to make the Daytona 500, but crashed earlier in the 500 qualifying session. I do believe that Mears, unless they get a good engine, he's probably going to struggle in the race. Now, some people are going to look at this situation, and they're also going to look at Tommy Joe Martin's situation, which for Tommy Joe Martin, he had been trying to run Martinsville with MBM or Garage 66, which I think he should have been approved for that race. In all honesty, I get that Tommy Joe doesn't have the success of people like Casey Mears, but Casey Mears only had one Cup win and 2 Xfinity wins. So if you're going to let Casey Mears run, you got to let Tommy Joe Martin's run too, in my opinion. But that's NASCAR's decision, and I understand and respect some decisions that NASCAR makes, but I also question that move a little bit. Now, getting back to this situation, many people are going to be coming on here and saying, well, how come Casey Mears got approved, but when Mike Wallace didn't get to approve? And yes, while Casey Mears has not competed in NASCAR competition since 2019, he's been racing and doing other things. He ran the Baja 1000 in 2021, I believe, also ran the Baja 1000 in 2023 and 2024. He's been doing some sports car racing as of late, and he's been staying healthy and getting fit. And Casey Mears is 47 years old. He's a lot younger than Mike Wallace. Mike Wallace was not very happy about Casey Mears getting approved, but guess what, Mike? One, you're 66 years of age now. You have not competed on an oval in 10 years in NASCAR competition, and you've only made 3 starts in the last 10 years in the Xfinity Series, where you drove on road courses. NASCAR gave you a roadmap to come back to the sport. And I understand you being upset, but you haven't been active in a decade. That's why NASCAR did not approve Mike Wallace, and he tried to jump to Daytona. Had he tried to go to Martinsville and done that from the get-go, NASCAR probably approves Mike Wallace. They absolutely probably would have, because he wanted to start at a short track. He wanted to jump straight to Daytona, which didn't make sense. Now, what are the realistic expectations for Casey Mears? Again, I don't expect Casey Mears to be a major threat and serious contender in the race, because again, like I said, the MBM team, they're not the fastest organization as a whole, and they generally have struggled in the last couple of years to be up front and be very, very competitive. Never been a team that's been really, really quick. But it's kind of crazy seeing people like Casey Mears come out of retirement. And of course, Casey Kane, who's going to drive for RCR at Rockingham in about a month or so for now. He was really fast in the test, actually, where he was the 8th quickest car and was up there with the likes of Ryan Sieg and Austin Hill and Jesse Love, who are going to be fast in that race as well. So it's cool to see all these people coming out of retirement. We got Carl Edwards coming back to the sport. You got Derek Cope, who's got a team now, and he's back in NASCAR in some way, shape, or form. It's crazy to see people kind kind of when I was growing up watching, coming back into sport in some way, shape, or form. Casey wants to reach 500 starts in NASCAR competition, which I think he's got a good chance and opportunity to do that if he wants to run a lot of races. Now, if he runs this race, he's probably going to be approved for other races down the road. And if he can be super successful, this could lead to other opportunities. So we'll see what other drivers come out of retirement down the road. But I think it's cool that Casey Mears is going to come out of retirement and race in NASCAR. I hope he's competitive, and I really hope he's fast and can have a chance and opportunity to do really well with MBM in 2 weeks from now at Martinsville Speedway. And now we're going to head on to the final major story of today's episode as we're talking about Carl Edwards once again. Now, we have talked a lot about Carl Edwards on the channel over the course of the last couple weeks because it was announced earlier this week that Carl Edwards would be going to Amazon Prime to be a studio analyst for the pre- and post-race shows. He'll be joining the likes of Daniel Trotta and Corey LaJoie in the pre- and post-race show. But one thing that was talked about was the most recent Dale Jr. download, and there's been a lot of questions surrounding this, and I think the most recent Dale Jr. download that he had with Carl Edwards may be one of the best sit-down interviews we have seen, not just on the Dale Jr. download, but I think it's one of the best interviews we've seen in motorsports world, and also one of the best interviews we've seen in the sporting world as well. It's up there with some of the great Joe Rogan podcasts that we've seen in the past. But one big thing that was talked about is why Carl Edwards retired. And Dale Jr. asked questions to Carl about why he went ahead and retired from the sport and kind of reflected on that and said, why did he leave the sport in the first place? Well, Carl Edwards actually spoke about that on the Dale Jr. down. And he basically said and kind of talked about what happened during that night and revealed the reason why he left the sport. One reason that he did leave the sport, and there's some truth to this, is because of the concussion issues. And he confirmed that in the most recent podcast by saying that the concussion issues that were happening in 2016 with Dale Jr. when Jr. had his concussion issues in 2016, that was one of the reasons for health and safety, was one of the reasons why Carl Edwards did end up retiring. But one theory that's been going around over the course of the last 10 years or so, since Carl retired unexpectedly in 2017, is the fact that what happened in 2016 Ford EcoBoost 400 was one of the reasons why Carl retired. And Carl Edwards actually confirmed that that was the big reason why he ended up retiring. Let's go back to 2016, the Ford EcoBoost 400. Kyle Larson probably has the fastest car in the race. He's completely dominating in the 42 Target machine. You've got Carl Edwards, though, who has the fastest car of the championship 4 cars, and really the only guy who can keep up with Kyle Larson most of the night in the race. And Carl Edwards is on the run to the championship. Kyle Busch isn't too far behind, and Joe Logano's kind of keeping up as well. But pretty much Carl Edwards has got the championship locked up. And then he doesn't have the championship locked up because with 16 laps to go, a caution would end up coming out for Dylan Lupton, who was driving number 32 car for Go Fast Racing, and he brought the caution out, which was a really stupid yellow. After that surface, there was a restart that took place with 10 laps to go in the event. Edwards on the inside, Kyle Larson on the outside. Joe Logano tries to make a move to the inside with the Penske car, and Carl tries to come down and block, and it causes a massive crash where Carl gets collected, Brad Keselowski gets collected in the crash, Mark Truex Jr.'s car goes on fire, and a lot of big-name drivers end up collected in the wreck. Carl Edwards handled the defeat very, very gracefully and really handled it very well and even went up to the pit box and said, go and win the championship because you guys deserve it. Then, of course, they went back to the final restart, and Carl Edwards ended up not winning, but Jimmy Johnson would go on to win a 7th championship. And Carl Edwards pretty much said that NASCAR at the time was also throwing entertainment cautions and entertainment yellows around that time. And I think NASCAR was looking for entertainment. And I think the playoff format also played a role there. I think Carl Edwards basically leaving the sport was, for me, when it was announced in 2017 that Carl Edwards was leaving around my birthday that year, about 10 years ago at this point, it was one of the most shocking things that I can remember being as a young fan. I was in school at the time, and I was thinking, why is Carl Edwards retiring from the sport? And then there's been a lot of theories about the health, and there's been a lot of theories around the entertainment side of things. But I think that the playoff format, especially back in 2016, which I think was worse in 2016 than what we got currently at the moment, which I still do not like the current system we have, but I think the one we got right now is a little bit better than what we had in 2016. But I think Carl Edwards brings up a lot of really valid points here about the certain systems, and I think that the entertainment side of things, because NASCAR, well, we all are here to entertain the sport, there was a lot of concern toward the drivers. And I think Eric East brought up a really good point and a very similar driver to compare, Kyle Larson. Kyle Larson has expressed interest because of the entertainment side. Kyle Larson has expressed interest in maybe down the road focusing on dirt in the next couple of years. And Kyle Larson has said it multiple times in the last 2 to 3 years especially that he doesn't know how much longer he's going to be in the sport and could retire from NASCAR as a whole at the end of like 2030, 2031 or something like that. There's a lot of murmurs and a lot of rumors going on around that currently at the moment that Carl Edwards could retire, not Carl Edwards, but Kyle Larson could retire in the near future and pull off of Carl Edwards and walk into the sunset. Kyle Larson's already won a championship at this point, unlike Carl Edwards, but I look at Christopher Bell too. Christopher Bell, someone who has been up to a really strong start this year in 2025. There's even murmurs about him potentially retiring in the near future and focusing on dirt racing once again because he's loving dirt racing. He seems a lot happier dirt racing compared to NASCAR. I think NASCAR needs to be listening to some of these drivers because we don't know how long some of these guys are going to be around in the sport. And it seems like in some way, shape, or form, they are starting to listen a little bit more to the drivers, but there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. They've got that playoff committee that's coming into play, which I think bringing drivers like Denny Hamlin in, like Christopher Bell has been outspoken. I think that's really one of the most important things that can happen for the sport currently at the moment. They need to have these big name personalities and personnel come in because I don't think they want to see the same situation to happen with Carl. And while Carl Edwards wasn't going to be around much longer after 2017 because Carl Edwards was almost 40 years old at that point, and a lot of drivers were retiring around their late to early 40s at that point. I think it was at the time a very shocking situation, and I think there were a lot of major factors, again, that really played a role in Carl Edwards retiring, and I think that the playoff system, again, really played a major role into that, and I think it's good that Carl finally acknowledged some of the theories why he retired, and he wanted to spend more time with his family, which makes a lot of sense, right? Carl Edwards had multiple kids at that point, and he wanted to spend his time with his wife, Kate, and I think that makes a lot of sense for Carl, too. But I think what's so good now is he's come back and has fallen in love with the sport once again and has come back to be involved in the sport in a major, major way. And I think that's really good for the sport as a whole to see him come back. But it's also great now to see after almost a decade at this point that he's finally revealed why he left the sport after 2016. And I think it's good we finally got information on that. It's a really good podcast. I suggest going down and listening to it. He talked about sailing across and going to Guernsey and multiple parts of the world. I think it's a fantastic podcast, and it's a must listen to if you've not checked it out currently at the moment. So, that is today's Law NASCAR News and Motorsports News episode. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel. Notifications on so that if I win a video, it does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support me on Patreon as well. Let's go below that and comment your thoughts below on today's episode. Word thoughts by Carl Edwards revealing why he left the sport after 2016. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And word thoughts by Casey Mears returning back to NASCAR. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Later today, we're going to do reactions to NASCAR Xfinity Series qualifying from this weekend in Las Vegas, and we are also going to do the Truck Series race review from Las Vegas, depending on what the weather situation in my place. And then, of course, we should have the reactions to Cup qualifying tomorrow, and we are going to have the review for the Xfinity race. And on Sunday, we're going to have the starting lineup video for Las Vegas, and then, of course, we are going to have reactions to Cup, the race, and then we'll also likely have a Shane Van Gisbergen video coming out on the channel. Content coming out also out on people like Haley Deegan, Shane Van Gisbergen, Carl Edwards, Kurt Busch, Kyle Busch, Connor Zilish, Bubba Walls, Matt DiBenedetto, Frankie Muniz, Cletus McFarland, other people in the sports channel, Creed, Sam Mayer, Junior Motorsports, all the good stuff, Chase Elliott as well, Kyle Larson, all this stuff will be coming out on the channel very, very soon. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode, and I'll see you guys next time for more great, awesome NASCAR content, other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, buddy.